Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. It's good to see such a great crowd here today for our sixth session in the fall series for the Education Policy Colloquium with the program on education policy and governance. My name is Jim Pizer. I'm an academic visitor here at Kennedy School. And prior to this, I was Secretary of Education for 8 years in the Baker administration. And it's an honor to be working alongside Professors Paul Peterson, who was here just a second ago. I see all of his here. He slipped out, and Marty West here at Harvard. In addition to today's event, we've got 2 more sessions for the remainder of the fall semester over the next 2 Thursdays, both of them here at noon here in Taubman. So please mark your calendars and come back. Our next session in particular is Thursday, November 9th, featuring Clint Bolick, who is a justice of the Arizona Supreme Court and a longtime legal and policy advocate on behalf of parental choice in education, including importantly through his many years at the Institute for Justice. And Clint's topic will be, quote, "Unshackled, Freeing America's K-12 Education System." So I hope you all will join us for that session. And today's session is on a similar topic. Specifically, our guest is Derrell Bradford, president of 50 CAN, who will be talking about the future of charter school and choice, principles for an education system without boundaries. As many of you know, this is a subject that is shifting really before our eyes as choice initiatives like education scholarship accounts or ESAs are being introduced, enacted, and deployed in a variety of states around the country, even as the charter school movement is under increasing political pressure, including places like here in Massachusetts, where it has seen some of its greatest successes, both in terms of enrollment growth as well as student outcomes. At the same time, there's been a surge in homeschooling and the development of new options like micro schools, much of which was fueled by COVID, all of which are creating an even more diverse educational landscape, or as I heard from Derrell earlier this week, a pluralist or pluralistic, one or the other, education landscape. So hopefully, I'm sure we'll hear more about that when he speaks. For those of you who don't know 50 CAN, it's a national educational advocacy organization that originally grew out of CONCAN, which, as the name suggests, was based in Connecticut and focused on driving policy change at the state and local level. 50 CAN now works to build and support a network of like-minded state-based advocacy groups with affiliates and campaigns in a dozen states, all focused on high-quality educational options for all students with transparency and accountability for performance and student outcomes. Before joining 50 CAN, Derrell served in similar roles advocating on behalf of children and families, especially in New Jersey, through organizations like Better Education for Kids and Excellent Education for Everyone. On the 50 CAN website, Derrell says that, quote, he feels passionately about a lot of things, but nothing engages me more than working to make sure that every kid has the same chance I did to attend a great school or have a great teacher. And I'm sure by the end of today's session, you'll see that his claim to be passionate is indeed true. After Derrell's comments, we should have ample time for questions and answers and conversation. Although we'll give priority to the folks in the room in terms of taking questions, we'll try to engage folks who are dialing in through Zoom. So for those of you who are calling in, please put questions into the chat and we'll try to get to them as time allows. And just to make sure that everyone's aware, session is being recorded and will be posted on the PEPG website. So in effect, we're all on the record today. And with that, it's my privilege to turn the program over to Derrell Bradford. Welcome, Derrell.
That was awesome. State Chief of Massachusetts to introduce you. Professor Peterson, Professor West, Jim, I know I can call you Jim, absolutely. And all of the folks here at the Kennedy School. I'd like to thank you for coming for the food and staying for the talk. And all 2 people plus the crickets on Zoom. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to mix like a couple of metaphors to talk about this thing today, but it is to talk about like policy principles for what I think is like the education system in the future. They have like significant implications for charter schools and what charter schools do and the kinds of charter schools we have, but they are not exclusively bound by that paradigm. So next slide, please. Oh no, I got the slide. There it is. Boom.
Should, hang on.
Yep. Oh, there it is. Okay. So to start to talk to Jim's, what Jim was talking about two things, music and education choice. And the education choice piece, I start there because this was mine. So this is the St. Paul School for Boys in Brooklynville, Maryland, where I went to school on a scholarship from grades 7 to 12. It's an independent it used to be an independent all boys Episcopalian school. We had a sister school on campus. Now they are called the St. Paul's Schools. And this is the most important thing that ever happened to me. So I grew up in Southwest Baltimore. One of the earliest conversations I can remember was my mother and my policy conversations rather was my mother and my grandmother talking about whose address we were going to use so I could get into the middle school I was not zoned for. I had an aunt who taught in the Baltimore City public school system, so she really helped me navigate the system in a way that most kids didn't. I went to like the best middle school you could possibly go to. It was the worst one for me. I had like tremendous sort of social anxiety. It was big and the kids were rich and I was poor and all of that stuff. The kids were white, I was not, like all those things. And so while not a perfect experience, I learned so much about myself and the world here. I learned I like to write and that I like to sing. I played football and lacrosse. It was just great love of lacrosse, which I played in college. And the one thing that I left here with was knowing that I had been incredibly lucky and that there were all kinds of kids on my block who were just as smart or smarter, who had all the potential in the world. And the difference between my life and their life was that they didn't have a chance to match with the same kind of school that I did. And so I've been incredibly fortunate for the last like 20 years at this point to work with people like Jim and Marty and Professor Peterson and others to help change public policy so that every child can have the same kind of opportunity that I have. I don't think you have to win the parent lottery to go to the school that helps you become the best version. So what does any of that have to do with music? Does anyone know what this is? Oh, you're a ringer in the back. Yeah, there it is. It is a record store. Correct. It is a record store. The antiquity of this talk is actually part of the charm of it, for what it's worth. So not only is this a record store, this was the record store in HMV in Times Square. Sorry, it was called HMV in Times Square. HMV stood for Her Majesty's Voice. I used to go to this record store all the time because before I was an education policy advocate, like having done it for a long time, I was a magazine editor. I know that seems like a very strange leap in careers. And one of the magazines I used to run was a monthly nightlife bar, club, and lounge guide, and it was called 411. Again, into antiquity, 411 was the number you used to call if you wanted to find out things. There was information. That was the name of the magazine. And so whenever people asked about that job, I used to tell them we would just show up and get toe up and write about it. So it was a great job, and if you were 27, it is a perfect job to have. But we used to spend a lot of time at HMV. HMV was a fabulous record store, which is to say they sold records and CDs, those little silver things that look like records. And they had a great import section. The staff was incredibly helpful, and we would go over there like every Wednesday, I guess is what it was. It was Tuesday or Wednesday was the new music day, and that was great. Does anybody who remembers these things called record stores know what it was like if they did not have what you wanted? So that there was this horrible process where you would get like a huge book, almost like a telephone book. Does anybody know what a telephone book is? It's like telephone book, and you go through it, and you'd have to find like the name of the album that you wanted, and there would be like a little like a number normally, and then you put the number in, and it would take weeks to actually get the album. Normally, it's like an import, and it was a long process, and it was an expensive process. So, and I'm not trying to bust on the record store formerly known as HMV, because it was a really good record store. But if it did not have what you wanted, the process was pretty awful. Does anyone know what this is? So Napster was like a tidal wave of a billion little drops of water that were all things you'd never heard before. And Napster kicks off what I like to call the digital music revolution, because it changes three really important things about how you get music. One, you could get whatever you wanted. Two, you could get it whenever you wanted. And three, you could take your music wherever you wanted with you, right? So these three, the where, the what, the when, these are three enormous changes. Like I can remember times when I was at in college at that second tier institution known as the University of Pennsylvania, where I'd go out at night and I'd be at a frat party and some song would come on and it would be the best song ever, and you'd have no way to know what the song was because no Shazam. And you'd want to be like, wow, I wish I had that song right now. And it's like, oh, but there's no such thing as a 24-hour record store. But the most important thing about Napster is that it changes people's expectations of music because of the where, the what, and the when. And once that happens, you can no longer put it back in the bottle. And I just want to say, it is not like Napster was without flaws, because the biggest flaw being it was illegal. but you could argue that the only way something like this could come into existence is sort of like a bottom-up, super disruptive way that that circumvented all kinds of regulations out of. All right. Does anyone know what this is? Thank you. This is a talk. It demands participation, people. So a transformative concept or policy is introduced, and it changes the way people interact with the thing forever. iTunes rationalizes and makes legal the demand and expectation that Napster set free. Other than innovating on the where, the what, and the when, because there are lots of good things that happen with iTunes. One thing is that you know that the file you get is actually going to be the file that you're looking for instance, right? Another thing is that artists are getting paid now. That was nice. Like, so we set up a thing where people could get rewarded for your downloads. But I would say the most important thing that it did is it raised the expectation for buying a whole album, because now you could get singles. So does anybody remember back in the day, way back, you buy, again, like a CD or an album, and there'd be one great song on it, and you buy that song for $15.99, and 14 songs that suck would come along for the ride. So now if I'm going to buy a whole album, it's got to be really good, because instead I'll just assemble the thing that I want, right? Because I can have something from here and something from there. So that, yet again, is the sort of thing that you can't put back into the bottle once it's gotten give the genie back in the bottle. Okay, so this is my thing. This is my sort of like preferred vehicle, and Spotify unleashes this sort of like change in how people get music on a fourth axis for me, which is how much. So we used to think about how much music you had in terms of physical space, like where could you put all of your albums or your tapes or whatever. I still have like CDs and boxes and a little envelopes and all kinds of things with the art and all that kind of stuff. And then we went to digital space, right? It was like, how big is your hard drive? We lived in that world for a while. And now we're like, how much is time? It's like, it's your cell phone, or are you on Wi-Fi or whatever, because you're more often than not, you are streaming. When I was in high school, way back in the Pleistocene, one of my teammates, when we drive around, he used to tell people he had 100-disc changer in his trunk, right? So it was like, it was a big carousel, and it was like, I love that there's some people in here who know what these things are, so thank you very much. It was like a big carousel, and it had like 100 CDs in it. He could not tell you what the next CD coming on was going to be, but he could tell you that there were 100 CDs back there, right? So all of that happens with Spotify. But the thing that Spotify does for me that I like the most is the curation feature, right? So I am, in case it's not obvious, a huge child on the inside, and I like video games. Like when I'm not yelling at myself or like on Zoom, like wondering whether or not anybody cares what I have to say, I play video games. And so like one of them, I'm not playing it as much now, but I've played it extensively, is that I like Grand Theft Auto. And so if anybody's ever played Grand Grand Theft Auto, it's like a mayhem simulator, right? But one of the things that you do is you spend a lot of time in the car driving around, listening to the radio. And as a person who does not drive in real life, this is like, it's sort of like a second life kind of thing for me. And the radio stations are really good. So in 4, there's this one radio station called Mirror Park Radio, which is sort of like the alternative station. That's really good. There's another one that plays like kind of like a bunch of acid jazz. It always starts off with this Grover Washington tune, which is really good. And I can remember the day where I was just like, oh wow, I would really like to listen to this. And I went to Spotify and I was like, Mirror Park Radio, and up came the playlist. Like somebody out there knew the songs and had put the playlist together for me and was doing the work of helping me like pull that experience together. So I really like Spotify. And again, it leads on to how much, and that too is something that I don't and put back in the bottle. Oh, okay. So what does any of this have to do with education? If music is education, most people get it at the record store. You actually get it at your assigned record store. And it is great if they have what you want, right? Or if you can afford to live close enough to the record store, or if you can buy the record if it's there. But if it doesn't, then, things are significantly more difficult than that. So I just set that up as kind of the paradigm for the rest of the talk, because it's obviously like not entirely about music and what happened with the record store or whatever, but it is about change and disruption that comes from the outside and how you adapt to it and what laws you might or might not pass if you want more of that disruption or less of that disruption. And that is what we'll sort of get into now. Now, listen, I got to do this because I think it's super important to do this. As I was telling Jim this week, we had the occasion not to be at the Crimson, but at the Cardinal the other day out of Stanford. And for me, I don't think that we have properly reckoned with the effects of prolonged school closings, particularly for our most vulnerable kids. And all of the data that we keep getting says this is like the worst domestic tragedy of our lifetime. I want to qualify my assertions about it by saying that in March of 2020, I remember like March 13th, it was Friday the 13th, I was in Georgia, I'd given a speech, there were 2 people there, right? Because everybody was like, why are we still having this thing? And I was flying home and I was at the front of the line, I was like, shut it all down. I live in New York, New Jersey, I was scared as hell, I'm sure lots of people were. By August, I was like, yeah, something else is going on, right? Like the politics have made their way into how we are making this decision about kids. Rich kids were already figuring out how to get back in front of real people. Some states had already made the decision to do it. Some nations had already made the decision to do it. But if the school districts in particular were filled with Black and brown kids who were low income, who didn't have a ton of choice, people were not making those decisions, right? And the latest data that we see is oppressively tragic. In New York State, 20 years worth of learning on the NAEP has been erased. NWEA released a study on 3.5 million public school students this summer, where one of the study's authors says we're actually seeing evidence of backsliding. Dr. Mackie Raymond at the Credo Institute, which is, I'm sure does a lot of work on charter schools, basically said that simply treating kids who'd had these disruptions normally, like academically, would mean that the loss was locked in forever. They basically need a significant acceleration, even just to get back to where they were. This discussion is like not even happening in my mind in like a serious way in the press and the media. It's just like something people are like, mistakes were made, like let's just get on with it. And I personally can I do that? And I would just also say, and I really want to point this out, I feel like we've introduced an element of labor uncertainty into all of this that is basically normalizing this kind of disruption that denies kids learning. Right now in Portland, the teachers are on strike, the kids are at home. That is a closed school, that is a learning disruption. Nevada, Seattle, Columbus, Ohio, like these, this is like a litany of places where this is becoming the regular order, but the regular state of things, not the occasional state of things. And I just want to point out that this is all terrible, and we should all be like outraged about it. But this tragedy does present us with an opportunity, and that is the chance to help fledge the new education system of the future. And I think that's the system that the nation's kids deserve. And I also think that that is a system without boundaries. So I always like to do this because it's kind of I like the way they write things in dictionaries. So normally I wouldn't mix metaphors, but I just wanted to take a moment to talk about innovation, right? And like building on the disruption of Napster. So Napster changed the who, the what, the when, the where, and the how much of music, right? And COVID changed the who, the what, the when, the where, and the how much of how we do education, right? And lots of people are sort of fighting to spin elements of that up or to arrest elements of it as it tries to grow. And I think there are like 3 of these things that right now we're seeing broad adoption on, like sort of 3 kinds of innovation on the who, the what, the when, whatever, that are important because they are examples of the policy energy we want to set forward in the future, so that the system of the future can make root, right? Okay, so the first one is that you can introduce a breakthrough technology that is difficult to regulate. So there's your Napster paradigm. You think about what Napster did to the record store, and a way that we're seeing, and music distribution, and a way that we are seeing this present itself in the world right now is with like generative AI, for instance, right? So James and I had a chance to see Sal Khan's newest thing, Under the Hood, the other day, which is sort of like part like diagnostician, part like teacher support entity, part like roving daemon that talks in the voices of like Eeyore and other fictional characters. It was interesting. It's all chat, whatever. But 91% of teachers and 87% of students in a survey last summer believe that technology is important to help students get back on track after the pandemic. 51% of teachers reported using ChatGPT, 40% of teachers use it weekly, and 71% of teachers and 65% of students agree that ChatGPT or like generative AI, use ChatGPT like Xerox, basically, it's like a copy machine, will be a tool for student success in college and the workplace, right? So this is a thing that got out of the bottle. Obviously, we're working very hard to figure out how to regulate it right now. But that it got out of the bottle means it got to what I call a sticky scale, like enough people are using it that it can't easily be undone right away. And this is a thing that is going to be a feature of the education system of the future. So that's one thing. The second way you can think about this who, what, when, where, how much, is that you can rediscover something that is trusted or excellent. So in March, that just to bring the music thing back in March of this year, vinyl sales overtook CD sales for the first time since 1987. I get advertised like turntables all the time now. I keep thinking about getting them on like the space for it. So I would say that like there are 2 things that represent that same spirit right now. One of them is sort of return to the science of reading, right? So reading rope, phonemic awareness, all this other kind of stuff. This is stuff that we knew a long time ago, had forgotten, and now somebody's like, oh, wow, guess what? There's actually a ton of science that we have about how to teach kids to read well. And, looked up the reading rope and all this Scarborough's rope, that's what it is, right? Yeah, and all those other good things. And this is actually like a movement right now that seems to have a lot of political momentum. Like 3 of our states passed laws on it last year. I don't know if you've ever heard the podcast Sold a Story, which is like heartbreaking and excellent and worth listening to. Emily Hanford is a reporter who did that, and it is all about sort of diagnosing the challenges of how kids learn how to read or don't learn how to read well. I would also say, and I think this is an important thing about my next point, is that problems of reading are universal problems. I think we found that the nation's political apparatus will do things when the problem is universal and widespread, which is to say the constituency it affects is diverse in terms of ethnicity, income, and location, and is much less likely to do things if the problem is specific. I feel like during the height of the charter school, last 20 years, like peak momentum charter schools, the way we thought about this was different. It was that like there are specific groups of kids who need a very specific opportunity that does not exist. We should align policy and incentives with that need to do that. Like, I'm not sure if that same momentum is there now. And I would just say the other one is like the rise of classical education, which is like a pretty big thing that I'm seeing all over the place. So that's the second one. The last one is this thing about you can change who is in charge of something or how something is measured. And this is actually probably the most important one of these three examples. So think about how we have organized American schooling for the most part. It's top down, and I don't say that in a pejorative way. Like it is a hierarchical set of structures. Normally, a state which has the authority to educate kids is delegating it to a municipality, which is going to execute on educating kids, and their local school boards and all this other kind of stuff. And parents in that, but like there's information, at least there has been information in the form of standardized assessments for like, as long as I have been doing this. And they help us do some things well and could help us do some things better. And the audience for those things is kind of parents, but mainly people who had Jim's old job, right? And school leaders, because they're going to make decisions about resources and a whole bunch of stuff based on that information and kind of the best cases. You also get like some choice and no money in that paradigm as a family, right? So like maybe you get charter schools, you could be someplace where they have other kinds of, in Massachusetts, you get charter schools, right? In another state, you might get other things, but here you get charter schools. And that has been the prevailing way that I think we've been thinking about who's in charge of something and how something is measured. Now we have a bunch of states that are actually doing precisely the opposite. They're saying, okay, we're going to put the family on top. We're going to give them a lot of money and a lot of choice, and we're going to see what happens. And there are like, I don't want to like holes isn't the way to describe it. There are structures that exist on this side of it, in particular around measurement, that don't yet exist in the same way on this side of it, right? And at 50CAM, we talk about this all the time. We have a pillar that we call a family's right to know, which is, how do you know how much is being spent on your kid? Like, how do you know how your district is doing? Like, what information do you have to make a decision about whether or not something is good or going to work for you? And there's like a little bit more to talk to about that, and it's not all great. But there's, in particular, I would say that the poster child for this right now is sort of the ESA movement that we're seeing in some of the Western and red states. I would just say that, believe it or not, these things are actually wildly popular with Democrats as well. And when I say with Democrats, I mean Democratic constituents. All the polling we had says that people are like, yeah, I'd love some money to be able to spend on my kid. But for Democratic electeds have very different incentives, right? And they have very different audiences. And so they tend to be less popular with Democratic electeds. I think that's very important to highlight. And I say that as a person who votes in Democratic primaries. Okay, so if you wanted to take those like three things that we just talked about, those three examples of innovation, and you wanted to kickstart them, what would you do? So I'm a science nerd in the way that an English major is a science nerd. So I like the concepts and not the math for what that's worth. And so I like this one in particular. So like 13 billion years ago, there was a boom and it got real hot. And then like a couple of minutes after that, well, maybe like a couple 100,000 years after that, four things ratify themselves in our like new proto-universe, right? And these are what the physics nerds call the four fundamental forces. Gravity is obviously gravity, keeping us all from flying off in space right now. Electromagnetism, so like light and waves. The strong force, which helps atomic nuclei stay together, and the weak force, which is radioactive decay. And if you take these four things and you just let them run for like 13 billion years, you get us, right? So it's an enormously complicated set of interactions over a very long time, incredibly nuanced and beautiful. And the outcome is like wild, diverse, and amazing, right? Like the universe is an amazing thing. So my hypothesis is that if we want that kind of pluralism, right, that what I call a confluence of pluralism, where the diversity of sort of like need, opportunity, aspiration for families is supported in ways that are better than just using your address to do it. You got to have four things that replicate this. And these are my four things. Okay, so, and there's like two little things in each of them actually. So the first one, which I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody here, going to this august institution is money. So and there are two things you need to do with money to help put the system of the future, charter schools included, into play. The first one is you have to modernize the nation's school funding formulas. Now, some states are taking this on, like Tennessee just did like an overhaul of its formula like last year, the 30-year-old formula. They went from like a resource-based model to like a student model. And there's some reps in Idaho have been thinking about this. We did it in New Jersey maybe like 15 years ago, something like that, but there's some head fakes in there. And the consensus seems to be that a weighted student model, right, where you're sort of more like kids who are already educated or worth more money, that is significantly more transparent, flexible, and that, I think this is the most important thing, that is significantly better at allocating resources in an environment where kids move and the number of kids is variable, is essential. So I think you've probably all seen this. So the number of birth rates in the West, in America, are going down and have been for a long time. Certainly, that's something that everybody in this room can do something about if you choose to. But the fact that there are fewer kids is not a charter school issue, right? It's not a school choice issue. It's like an American issue. And we have public education systems that are built on the hypothesis of unlimited or at least sustained student populations or student growth, and that is no longer a reality. So we need something that reflects student attitudes, family needs, student movement, and changing population in sort of an environment of more competition, better and more fairly, right? And we also need something just thrown on this that does not reinforce the incentives of past school finance arrangements, which we'll get to a little bit more in No Boundaries. So, right now, you buy your house and you get your school with your house, and we tax you based on where you live, and we give you your money, like not literally, but we give you your money from your house to fund your school specifically. And all of the incentives about that are exclusionary. So if we say, yeah, we want to do open enrollment, we're like, what are you talking about, man? Like, I paid for the house. I got the school. I followed the rules. Like, somebody else needs to get their thing, right? This is all like completely understandable human nature, even if it's reprehensible, right? But like all the incentives have been set up to do this. These incentives also give us public schools that are more segregated now than they were pre-Brown. They make Black kids more racially isolated than they've ever been. There are lots of reasons not to fund schools the way that we fund them now, but that is super important. The other thing I would just say, when I say fund families, I mean fund families. I mean like money to families. So on the one hand, like maybe an education savings account is the best way to talk about that. But I think there are three things three reasons actually to give families actual money to participate, I would say, like in the schooling market, or to sort of solve problems of education as they present themselves, right? The first one is that I just want poor kids that have the same sort of agency that rich kids have, right? And without money, they can't do that. So the like slide one about like every kid getting the best opportunity for them without money as a barrier, that is one of the things that I think we should be trying to solve when we're thinking about funding families directly. So that's one. The second one is that, I'm going to keep calling you out. This James and I have talked about this. The way that people are consuming school is very different now, which is to say the way that they're organizing it. And there's four ways that people are sort of like organizing school. You get the bundle, which is the traditional way to do it, right? So you buy your house, the school comes with it, right? You pay tuition, the seat comes with it. You win a charter lottery, the seat comes with it, and you get the whole thing all at once. Then there's what I call bundle plus, which is how the real ballers do it, right? So you get the best bundle you can possibly get, and then you go all in on all the other stuff. Tutoring, trips, sports, every other thing that you can possibly do. This is like a huge accelerant for the achievement gap and other things. Richard Reeves writes about this and all this other stuff. But that is the way it is sort of normally done. And you can't play in that unless you have money to do, right? Then you get what I like to call the half bundle. This is like the very interesting thing. And this is sort of super important for charter schools. So like My Tech High, which is helping school districts serve homeschoolers. So people are like, yeah, I like homeschooling, but I don't want to build a whole science lab in my house, or I want to play football. Like, how do we do that? And there's a whole finance mechanism necessary to help bring that into existence, to help more people do it. But that is a place where if you're a charter school, you're like, how do I offer this course for what? Right? Like a homeschooler wants to add my thing on this, how much does it cost? Like a district school person wants to send their kid to me for Mandarin, whatever, how much does that cost? Like that's an important thing. And then the last one is just kind of go your own way. You could call that homeschooling, but I like to point to this Wired magazine article from like 2015 about how tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley were educating their own kids. And they were basically like, yeah, we just want to do all the cool stuff. Like we get the reading and math stuff done, but we want to do all the cool stuff. Like how will we assemble that? So that's all going on in the world, and money is a way to help more families get that. And the last one I would just say, and I sort of spoke about it earlier, is insurance. So part of the reason why the Portland public schools are closed right now is because the families can't go anywhere. And I would argue the fact that we continue to see like teacher strikes, that was like a blue flower moon in the 5th year of the seventh sun rarity, right? Like these things like never happened, and now they're happening all the time. And so I would sort of posit to the group that school disruptions are a thing that are becoming a normalized feature of the schooling ritual, not an outlier. And families need something to deal with that, right? So when labor unions and school districts, for instance, can't get on the same page, and my kid needs to learn how to read, money is a way to solve that problem. And it was certainly the way that the richest family solved it during COVID. So those are the 3 things I think are sort of super important there. The second one is just when I say protecting innovations of the pandemic, I mean, there are 2 sets of innovations. One is all the stuff that happened outside of school. So like the microschool stuff, homeschool, like increase in homeschooling, the number of Black homeschoolers just tripled, pods, like new tools to assess learning, like a lot of the early information we had about learning loss was from Zern or similar platforms. This kind of stuff can help us diagnose and intervene much better in the future. But there were also changes in regulation in traditional district schools that are worth keeping. Licensure around for teachers. We had a campaign in Connecticut, our first can, where they basically changed teachers cert so that for now at least, if you're a certified teacher in the Northeast, you can teach in Connecticut, right? Versus only being certified in Connecticut. For me, that's the kind of thing that we should teach, especially in an environment of high teacher scarcity. The third thing, which is this market for measurement, this is like, I would just describe this as a tension. So right now, everybody at 50 Can is working on ensuring that kids take their annual assessments every year. We think the ritual of annual assessments is very important because they tell us things about schools that help us improve them. Everybody at 50 Can also knows, and would admit this at differing levels, that that ritual is under political assault right now, right? Or it is at least politically imperiled. We have states that are holding back the release of their annual assessments longer than possible. Annual assessments are becoming like a thing that is traded in other education policy deals. It is not certain that this thing will be there forever. And I see Dr. West. I don't want to make him say it out loud. I know he's one of the last capable men on the wall trying to keep this thing in place. But it doesn't make sense to ignore the politics of it. At the same time, there is this new world out there that's coming into existence, and it's like tutoring and clubs and all these other ways for people to learn. And we do want families to have the kind of information that they need so they can make a decision that is a good decision and good for them, right? So this question of how do we know? And I would just say that there is a tension about that. How do we know? Because to go back to the science thing, when you measure something, you change it. Or you can change it. It's like riffing on Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And so, for instance, how we chose to measure charter schools for like 20 years had a profound impact on the kind of charter schools that we have. We emphasize language arts and reading scores and growth on those things. And I'm all here for it, right? Like I'm down, I'm on that team, right? I'm on team literacy. but that there are certain kinds of schools, like in Boston, like Match, or like in New York, Success, like big CMOs, whatever, that were better positioned to get those gains earlier. And because of that, we did that more than we might have done other things. And that's why, for instance, in the Northeast, the charter sector looks different than it does in the West, right? And the constituency is different than it looks in the West. And I would just also say, to my point of earlier, if you like charter schools, or if you like the future, you need a diverse constituency to support it. And one of the things we have to do, which Massachusetts was not allowed to do when it tried to raise the cap on charter schools, is give more people access to charter public schools so that the constituency that supports them will be more diverse in terms of race, income, and location. As long as the constituency for charter schools is single party, geographically constrained, and largely of the same income bracket, meaning low to lower middle, who are the folks we actually worked on this policy for traditionally, it will be harder and harder to expand them. And that's like, I don't say that with any joy, but it seems the evidence seems to point that way. And then the last thing I would just say is, when I talk about no boundaries, this is one I'm just sort of like riff on. A couple of times in this talk, we've been talking about your house, the relationship between your house and your school, and the reason why we decided to do that as a country, right? And let me, for the people in the back, not literally in the back, but the people in the back, let me tell you, the reasons aren't good. Right? So we have a system that has given us schools that are more segregated by race and income than they were before it was illegal to segregate people. Before it was illegal to segregate people by race and income in the nation's public schools. New Jersey is actually in the middle of a lawsuit right now on this. New Jersey has a constitutional provision prohibiting segregation in public schools and the military. We're consistently top 5 in school segregation. Somebody is like, why is that? Well, it's because we have 600 school districts, and every one of them has a line around it, and it costs $500,000 at least to get into it, right? Because that's the cost of the mortgage that gets you your free exclusive public education that goes along with your house, right? So as long as we have that, we continue to enshrine not the best moment in our history, 1930s New Deal housing policy and all of that. We just mainline that into the American school system of the day. That is the thing that we should probably get rid of. And also, I would just say the most important thing about the no boundaries approach is that the moment you draw a line around something, you create an environment of scarcity. I'm on the inside of the line. What's on the inside of the line is mine. You're on the outside of the line. Everything outside of the line, you need to get yours, and yours is not mine. And that pits good people, families, all kinds of kids, all kinds of folks who might normally find common cause with each other against each other in the pursuit of what is best for their own children. That is not a way to build a school system. And we also already know that we're more than capable of making excellent schools, excellent learning environments, like to amend that, given everything we talked about, that work for people regardless of your address. One of those things is called charter schools, right? And I think a lot of those other things have come into existence because of the pandemic. So these are the things that we are working on at 50 Can. I would just say, and these are the things that I think kickstart it won't be 13 billion years, like maybe like the first charter school, you come back in 5 years and you see what happened, and then we can make some more decisions. But I would just ask everyone in the room, and everyone sort of like all 2 of the people watching this, to embrace the uncertainty, right? We have a lot of information about the things that we already know, and not a ton of information about the things that we do not know. And the process of acquiring that knowledge takes time, and it requires trust. Families and in new people in the education space who may not have participated before. And some states are rushing to the front to do this. I'm very happy that they're doing that, and I look forward to seeing what happens in the next 5 years. So thank you.
Derrell, stay up there.
Yeah.
So that the 3 people online can see you. Actually, more than 3. It says 7, although a couple of them maybe actually in the room.
200% of my initial.
I will say though, this is being recorded. It'll be on the website, so
Okay.
millions and millions of people around the globe will be watching this before
This
it's
is
done.
good. It's good.
Yes, very good. So let me sort of kick it off with a question, but then open up to folks in the room. I hope you all are thinking about what to ask. So a big sort of feature of this, and certainly in the music business analogy, is disruption. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about combination of maybe what the difference is between disruption in the music industry and disruption in education, as well as what your sort of take is on the zeitgeist of this issue. And on the first part, obviously, in the music business, disruption causes some companies to rise and fall, and some venture capitalists to lose money or make money, and at some level, who cares? That's their problem. But on the education side, there may be different trade-offs that we're talking about, and having winners and losers may be more challenging to deal with. And then the other is sort of, especially post-COVID, whether the zeitgeist is more leaning towards let's restore stability because we've had too much disruption already, or whether this is actually a moment for doubling down, if you will, or doing more disruption rather than less.
Yeah. So two good questions. Okay. So on your first one, totally respect your first question, right? And I will, it may not, though this talk has been flipped, I actually care about the ephemeral nature of human potential a great deal. And the only people who, there are lots of people who care more about it, and those people are parents, right? And so, like every family is going to have a tolerance for difference that I think, or for trying, that I think is an incredibly important element to bringing any of this disruption into the world in a way that is acceptable and sustainable. And so I think that really matters. Like I would not want to force my world vision on everybody. But I do think we're seeing this work itself out in a pretty cool way, because small is the new big. And I actually think charter schools have a real role to play on this. So, they were like Gates funded the small schools movement back in the day, and those were big small schools. Now there are micro schools, which are actually small schools, right? So the scale of the attempt used to be 500 people, and now it's 10 people. And I think you're more willing to find a group of folks who have the same tolerance for trying change at 10 people than you are at 500, given the level of disruption I'm sort of promoting here. Again, on the charter school thing, and I genuinely think charter schools have an incredibly important role to play here. One is that they have space. So it is much easier to say, hey, in wing X of my school, you can try your idea with the 5 families who are really interested in it, right? And let's see where it goes. And we know a lot about like making, managing, measuring schools from CMOs, right? And so I think that expertise can find a way to help us figure out how do we know question, like how do we measure success in the future in this way that is incredibly startup, and that in a lot of respects mimics the very, the energy of the first charter schools 30 years ago. So that's the one thing. The second thing about doubling down or going forward is that the answer is yes. So the polling that we had is that parents are sort of schizophrenic in a good way about what we should do. So some majority, like I'm being flipped, but it's a lot of parents, right? So like 80% of parents say we absolutely know our kids are behind, and we totally want people to focus on the basics, reading and math, or like a return reading and math course. The same amount of parents want the whole system totally reinvented, right? And so that is, I view that tension as like an opportunity. Obviously, all political windows, like the tendency is to do everything that you can and then fight to protect it because the window is open and available. And I think you're seeing a little bit of that. But the good thing is that you're not necessarily seeing it, all of it in all states. So some states are sort of, even on the ESA stuff, like some states are like, all right, well, you have to do tuition first. And some states are like, all right, here, you can have your money, right? And these are different approaches to the same challenge or the same opportunity. I think there'll be a lot of information there, and hopefully we can make much better sort of schizophrenic decisions about it in the future.
Great.
Great.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. It's been really interesting. I actually did go to a charter school for all of my high school career.
Where
So
are you from?
I'm from Delaware.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
we
You go to
actually
Newark Charter?
Wilmington charter. Yeah, Newark charter came later. But so I've had my own very unique experience with it. But one of the issues with charter schools at large is that they're basically no standardization for them. There's no regulation, so they're wildly inconsistent across location. For instance, like my experience has been relatively good. However, in New Orleans, after Katrina, basically every single school in the district is a charter school, and that has led to massive closures, schools and school years ending in the middle of the season, like just completely wild, completely inconsistent expectation of education. Is there any, like, do you have any way to address this, as if this is what you're pushing as like the way forward? Because
Yeah.
that's a big issue.
No. So you cited big tension, and I think so I was with I was with a bunch of African American elected officials at a thing in Florida a couple of weeks ago, and the word accountability was used often, right? And one of the things I left there being like was like, we need to focus group all these people and figure out what they mean when they say it, because people have different expectations around personalization and what we should do if something doesn't work, right? And I've also sort of argued that we don't actually have a system of accountability right now, like really in American schools. We have a system of transparency at best, right? Like we can tell you what is happening, but we can't really assure you that much is going to be done about what happens. I say that as a backdrop to your question because you cite something that's really important. So the point of charter schools is inconsistency. So let me say that again, right? The point of charter schools is not uniformity, right? And so the fact that you would get something different at one place than another is actually a feature of the model, not a defect. I know this. I'm being provocative here. You can come back at it, but I'm just giving you two anyway, right? That also said, if you do that, you introduce different challenges into the system. And so like New Orleans is its own very specific thing, right? It's the only place in America that has tried that. The folks down there would tell you that student achievement has improved significantly, despite that maybe not as much as they would have wanted it to, despite some of the challenges that you introduce. And I would also say that the challenges of New Orleans discretely were about discovering what happens when your theory plays itself all the way out. Like, what would happen if we had a district that was all charter schools? There's only one place in America where that's ever happened. And a lot of things that nobody expected to happen there, right? So just highlight that. At the same time, like 45% of the kids in Newark are in charter schools. There's a lot of research that Newark, sorry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research that says that charter school sector is one of the best in the nation, period. In all schools in Newark, despite the flailing of many of them, if you are a Black kid or a Hispanic kid and you're born there now, your life outcomes are significantly better than, or the chance of them being is way higher than it was even eight years ago. And there it's like 40% of the kids are in charter schools. Right. So I think that the challenge of knowing if something works in a diverse universe of delivery is a hard one. And if you want, or if you believe that uniformity or comparability are like non-negotiables, then this system isn't going to work for you, right? If you believe that families should know, and we should line it up whenever possible, because like our folks care about these things too. But that the matching between a kid, their family, their aspirations, and a learning institution is the most important thing. You're going to answer the question differently. Yeah, please.
When I talk about inconsistencies, like I'm not talking about the inconsistency between types of education. Like my women charter, primarily a STEM school, I had a very different education than the art school that I shared bullying with. Like I'm aware that like there could be benefits to different types of education. What I'm talking about, especially in the case of New Orleans, is a lot of charter schools shutting down in the middle of the year, where like kids don't know if they're actually going to have a school next week, and like that level of inconsistency where it's not like the school is not functioning.
Yeah. So I totally appreciate this. You know, I'm happy to plug you into Nirav Kingsland, who managed this entire thing, or Greg Richmond, who was one of the people who helped sort of manage the whole transition to an all charter district. I would just say that like the challenge of, okay, a kid wants to switch schools after the lottery is one where they were like, oh wow, everybody's not having lotteries on the same day. Like, what does that mean, right? That was an unanticipated thing that introduces the kind of uncertainty you're talking about. The model is one that says if you're not performing, you close, right? It's also one that says if you don't have enough kids, you close, right? And so the question of what do you do if the model works in the middle of the school year, I think, excuse me, and where the kids go, whatever, is certainly one. I mean, we dealt with this in New Jersey. There was a charter school in Trenton that wasn't doing particularly well, but was doing much better than Trenton Public Schools. And when it closed, I can remember I had like lots of friends in the department because the department closed it. Like, you're not meeting your charter. There was a real moral conversation around whether or not that was the best thing to do, because like we know what the alternative is. Like, maybe we should have done this, but we know what the model is supposed to do. Should we hew to that? And I just think that's the kind of thing we're going to be thinking about a lot more in a world like this. Yes.
Hi, thank you for this. I actually am not from the US. I come from a country that doesn't have charter schools. I don't know if charter
Eight
schools.
countries don't have.
Most of them, yeah. But I think there's been discussion of introducing them to. So I was wondering, what's your advice on introducing?
Yeah, don't call them charter schools. That is the first thing. No, I know that sounds funny, but I really mean it. Like, language matters and names matters and names matter. I mean, most American families think of charter school as a private school, even though it isn't. They're like, well, they have uniforms, but it's free. It's like, didn't you realize it was free? You know, so I would not convey that. I also think it's very. I'd had this conversation in Richmond a couple of years ago. We were before the pandemic. We were talking about, you know, housing segregation and charter schools in particularly, and a bunch of other things. And somebody said to me, like, well, what's special about charter schools? And I said, well, kind of nothing. But here are the elements that make a charter school a charter school. And if you do them well, then you get magic, right? If you do them poorly, you can get every other thing. And we talked about what the elements were, like leadership, freedom for teachers, accountability to families, like, you know, like all kinds of things that are indicative of the best charter public schools in the country. I think those are the kinds of things that people want regardless of the label. So I would lead with the features, not the label. That makes sense. Yeah, and start small. Anybody else? Yes.
I'll jump in and go back to Jim's original question and ask a more pointed or leading version of it, because I'm not sure you answered it. So
maybe I did that on purpose.
I was reminded as you were talking a little bit of the book that Clay Christensen and Michael Orn wrote on disruptive innovation in education. And one criticism of that book was that they took this set of ideas and even sort of projections about the pace of change from the world of business and sort of imported it into the world of public education without enough acknowledgement of the way in which the decision-making processes and the incentives are really quite different, where the incumbent actors have the ability to politically keep the innovation from getting off the ground. And so what's your story politically about how this takes off?
Yeah, so if I may, I think you asked two questions there. So my first one is that, like, the way to battle the incumbent system is to transfer finances to families. This is why the underlying thing of better finance and money to families is essential. It's basically the thing upon which the rest of it rests. So I would throw that out there. The second thing I would just say is that, like, I appreciate that education is not business. However, I think what we ascribe to consumer urgency in the business space is more prevalent in the education space now because of COVID, I think. Like, people are actually behaving differently about how they interact with schools in a way that I think we would have wanted them to, right? It would have certainly made the growth of any of these innovations, like the spread of charter schools, the change of union work rules and all of these other things much easier if that existed, like pre 2020 in the quantity that it does now. But I think it is in significantly greater quantity now than it was then. And I think there's evidence to prove that. I guess it's like Titan Partners. The study is like 1 million kids in America that aren't going to their neighborhood public school anymore, that were going to it before. It's like a third are in charters, a third are in private schools, and a third are gone, which I'm so like some of those people being homeschooled, some of those people are gone. I think actually this is a huge public policy challenge. I think your colleague Tom Kane thinks the same thing. Quasi dropout, disconnected, unfinished education youth are like going to be with us for the rest of their lives. It's a big deal that we haven't talked about that. But I think we're seeing a lot more consumer urgency, if you will, from families, and policymakers seem to be lining up money to give that life in a way that they weren't beforehand. Yes.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I am coming from the California context. I worked for an organization that was trying to start a charter school, but it failed at the district level and then was about to fail at the county level before we decided not even to go for a vote. So we're seeing a lot of backlash against charter schools in California. Is that pretty prevalent in your work? Are you seeing a lot of pushback in more recent years? Or do you think because of COVID, something has changed?
No, so in 2012, I think is what it is, the Education Next poll of American sentiment on education. I think you might find some of the people who run that poll in this room. That is the first year that, in particular, among Democrats, you see a change in the support for charter schools. Now, it's important to note that charter schools on the Democratic side, for instance, are wildly popular among African American and Hispanic families, not so much among white progressives who currently have control of the party. I would just like throw that out there. And I say that as a person who votes in Democratic primaries. So the friction on charter school growth is coming from lots of places. The founder pipeline isn't as deep as it used to be. I feel like the resistance used to be tolerance and now is destruction. It's like we used to be like, all right, you can live, we can live, and now it's like, no, it's us alone. Us and us alone. And authorizing is a political function in a lot of respects, right? So unless you have an independent authorizer that's insulated from these things, in New Jersey, we've got a couple schools authorized recently, but the State Department of Education is the only authorizer. If the governor decides he doesn't like charter schools, you don't need more charter schools, right? And so all of these things have sort of spun themselves up. This is why I keep sort of emphasizing and like pushing my colleague at Charter World on this, that one, you need to figure out a way to play in the broader world of education choice, right? Because there is a lot of momentum in not just with charter schools, but with other kinds of choice. Like that can give us opportunities to grow and sort of share what we've learned. Two is the constituency that we have might love us, but it's not big enough, right? And so the question of going to the district level and going to the county, because I know like a little bit about how it works in California, going to your competitor to get the keys for existence is not optimally organized. At some point we have to have more people, right, to make that work for us, or you have to change a lot so somebody else can do it. And those things are real and present barriers to the future of charter schooling. It's the stuff we're working on, and it doesn't make sense to ignore it as a problem. Yes.
When charter schools originated,
You're working on the population?
I am, yeah. Schools someday. When charter schools originally, began, the idea was that they would be kind of pockets of innovation that would be shared with public school districts and improve the education field overall. I think we've seen in the last 30 years that the innovations that charter schools have come up with are mixed, and also because of a lot of like the political elements that you shared, the innovations haven't been transferred to the local public school systems in the way that it was originally intended. Are there lessons from the that past 30 years that we should be thinking about when we think about how do we take innovations from the more recent pandemic and actually make them more widespread occur instead of getting trapped in the same kind of loop.
Yeah, so when I first took this job, I think I overestimated people's altruism and underestimated their self-interest. And one of the great challenges of exporting what we know from charter schools to other schools is that the system we have now has interests and incentives. And to do what you do in some of the best charter schools will require you to change things. And there are human beings in the traditional set of institutions, and human beings don't like change, right? Which is why, in a lot of respects, it's easier just to start something new. I think the original hypothesis of like testing something under different rules and exploring it has actually given us good things. I think there's a lot of data on public school improvement in the face of charter school like competition or whatever, not at the scale that I think most of us hope for or wanted. But I would just say that like the great lesson or lessons is that it's harder to do than everybody thought, and that not everybody wants to change. Like, and I don't say that like I deliver that in a neutral way, right? Like not everybody wants to change because human beings are human beings, right? Like you build a world and you live in it, and that kind of is what it is. Maybe that's the best lesson I have. I think the most important difference, though, and kind of the Professor West's canard there earlier, is that families are acting in a different way now than they were. And so where you will see the fastest transmission of something new or something great, right? So like we talked about earlier, or the rediscovery or the change of who's in charge of it and how it's measured or whatever, are in places where the families are empowered in a way that they have not normally been. I think in the wealthiest districts, one district gets a like a study abroad program, and then the next district is like, oh man, they got it, we have to do it, right? And that is to me like a manifestation of money as a vehicle to assert power on institutions that have a lot of built-in incentives. What we haven't had before is a system where more people get to do that. And I think beneath all of this, like the expectation that the system perform differently and the ability to force them to do so is giving more people, the freedom to pressure, right? And to decide and to express. And I think that's kind of the era. I hope that's the era that we're reaching.
Earl, maybe I'll ask you one last question and then we can wrap up because we're about of time, and maybe it'll give you an opportunity to end on a hopeful, positive note or not. It depends on how my question comes out. First thing is just around, in some ways, on the other side of the disruption question we were talking about earlier, with respect to charter schools, there was a big expectation that charter schools and charter school growth would disrupt the existing system. And as you indicated, the sort of competitive dynamics haven't worked out quite as well or as significantly as many people hoped or expected. But by the same token, the existing systems didn't collapse either. I mean, in DC, you're 50%, in Newark, you're almost 50%, in Camden, all these other places where you've got big charter sectors, the existing system is still there. That's right. And in some ways, maybe impervious to change, but certainly not to destruction. But I guess my question is related in some ways, maybe to the post-COVID experience. Do you get any sense that there's potential for disruption that's a little more inside out than outside in within existing districts?
Yeah.
And if so, is there a virtuous cycle here that some of these things you're talking about that may be occurring in other parts of the country or outside of the traditional systems might actually be embraced a little bit more actively by the folks on the inside?
Yeah, so great questions. I think the first thing that you cited about like DC is 50% charters and the district is still there is actually incredibly important, because all of us have been told that opening one charter school would destroy the world. There will be no more public schools anywhere in the universe, right? I mean, this is the kind of hyperbole that powers the debate. That is not true, right? Anywhere. So I think that's an important thing to consider. The second thing I would just say is that so families and kids are really frustrated. I would also say that in my like anecdotal experience, educators and leaders are also incredibly frustrated. So like I really laid out how I feel about school closings and the incentives of the traditional system, but I'm not the only person who saw that. And I've had occasion actually to meet like some really wonderful people who work in traditional public schools, like at conferences and stuff afterwards, and a lot of them are just as upset as I am. Feel like they were constrained by many of the same things that I sort of highlighted as being friction on the future, like taking root or whatever, and want to do something about it. I just think that, one of the tactics of the present is to delay. And one of the things that I think we need to figure out how to do is give folks who are within the system a moment to change, right? That will have all the energy and all the dynamism of everything that's happening outside of the systems, but within, and see what they do with it. And I know everybody who works with me would be happy to figure out what law or laws are necessary to make that possible.
Great. Well, Derrell, thank you very much. It's really terrific. See you all next week.